purpose of the query.
This one will get the 5% vote. I don't think
this would be the perfect opportunity for me to utilise that picture. You could just be holding
The mole.
in the palm of your hand.
Oh, when you were doing the toilet awards. Yeah.
It covers stars.
Right.
Oh, do you want Carol or Rowland?
Rowland, please. Thank you. My real name.
Wearing the shirt that demonstrates the passion.
Oh yeah, please write that in your article. front page. Ray has a passion for, no, headline. Passion for design. Passion for graphics.
Mention the podcast.
Oh yeah, should I shout out the podcast?
Yes,
Like at the end of
what
my
role do you
speech?
want? What role do you want? Is your introduction?
because I mentioned in it that was academic.
I want to do a.
Are you an academic?
Yeah, well I'm a course rep.
So
Is that like that's
Well, you can literally, if you are secretary of a society.
see, I'm on loads of societies, it's picking which one.
all of them.
Should I go for my most?
List them all.
Should I just go for my
as leader
superior?
of the Yes campaign, you live in the No campaign.
Yeah, but we're going to add a little bit of context.
I'm Jack Green.
Person. Yeah, can we all just be person? In honour
Why
of
do we
Harry
have to do
Parsons.
that? Just because we want to say that this is a shit idea.
I don't know.
We on the app or not?
Yeah.
We actually on.
Yeah.
We actually on.
Yeah. 10 past instead. 10 past you're on.
Hello.
I mean, your mic isn't on, but the ambience is on.
Oh.
I'm having a relative.
When you start, I'll put you on.
No park, well, the park is nice.
There are 3 people watching NSR.
People. Alright.
There are 3 people watching via your
Alright. Here are the facts.
My phone, okay.
So is that just posted?
Yeah.
So that just starts posting
Apparently
itself.
someone's watching
That's
it now.
genius.
It's technology, isn't it?
That's fantastic. Right, when are we starting?
She started 8:15, so people.
Yeah. We know what you
3
want,
minutes.
Chris, do you want to do a 3-minute sort of introduction to the channel?
He's on 8%.
Yeah?
Is there anything you want?
We'll go to the podium.
That one, that's the only thing I don't have printed off.
You can introduce wherever you want. I reckon we'll be alright.
I don't think the people at the back will be able to hear Chris.
You have to shout.
But I can't see them, Scars, so they're not a problem.
They're so far away.
Right, should we start?
Yeah, go on then.
Can I just take a picture? Yeah, take a picture of the room.
Oh yeah, like from the back, from the
I
very
used
back.
to do that.
Well, thank you for coming. For those who have come, you'll know that the NUS has been in a tricky situation for the past few years, and we left 3 years back. Yes, I don't know how far I could go with that. I'm sure you'll hear some very good arguments today if you're undecided. But yeah, I'll take it away, give it to Harry, who's just walked. There you go. Harry Parsons, I give it to you.
That's this. That's that. You want to just turn that off?
Oh, I don't really care that much. Okay. Good evening. In 2016, Newcastle University became the second university to disaffiliate for the National Union of Students. Founded in 1922, the NUS is a confederation of around 600 students' unions with over 95% of students' unions around the country being members. We are not a member. By 4 speakers, 2 speaking in favour of Newcastle University Students' Union re-affiliating with the NUS and 2 speaking against. Speaking in favour are Emma Dawson, and the leader of the campaign to the Yes campaign, and Jack Green, who is speaking, who has done us a favour this evening by joining us. He is the Welfare and Equalities Officer for Newcastle University Students' Union. He has claimed he's an undecided voter, but is willing to join us this evening to lay out the Yes side of the argument. On the opposing side, speaking against Newcastle University Students' Union rejoining the NUS is Scarlett Rowland. She's leading the Yes campaign, and Johnny Hall, he's the education officer. So we'll split tonight's debate into 4 sections, really, about representation, about money and finances, about politics and the politics of the NUS, and then kind of finishing off with the future of Newcastle University Students' Union and the future of the NUS. Henceforth in the debate, I'll refer to the Students' Union as NUSU. My name is Harry Parsons, and let's begin. If you would each like to start with your opening statements. Emma Dawson, would you like to go first?
Yeah. So the campaign to leave constantly asks the question, what has the NUS actually done for us? So I'll answer that question. They introduced the 16 to 25 rail card. They fought for students to be exempt from paying council tax. They worked to establish the tenancy deposit scheme to make sure that students had their deposits returned. They lobbied the government for the creation of the postgraduate loan. They work to ensure that universities cannot use academic sanctions against students with non-academic debt, just to name a few of their achievements. With over 7 million students, the NUS proves itself as a force to be reckoned with. It gives a voice to marginalised students, and its disaffiliation is often what hurts these students the most. Their research into these experiences of these students is pioneering and informing national change, but the NUS brings around change for all students. Affiliated unions can use a purchasing consortium, which works with companies to make sure they get the best deals on products, food or drink that they might sell. In many cases, SUs who are affiliated actually make money through selling the extra cards. They can keep all the money that they make, and this can reduce the costs. In case of Exeter or Bath, they've actually earned up to £30,000 each. There are many accusations that the NUS pushes motions that don't actually affect students. But when you look into this argument, you see that it begins to unravel. The media has a unique role to play in how it represents the NUS, often pushing misleading and damaging articles that present officers to a high degree and misrepresent them. This was in a time when this conversation about disaffiliation began to happen. Yet students still voted to stay at Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, York and Nottingham, to name a few. Just 10 days ago, Ulster University had their referendum, with 90% of students wishing to stay. We find ourselves in a strange situation. Out of an organisation that 95% of SUs are a part of, in a time of uncertainty, now isn't the time to stand alone. If we stand as part of a collective, we can fight for something we couldn't fight for as an independent students' union. We can make that change happen if we join the NUS.
Scarlett Rowland, the leader of the No campaign.
I was going to begin by going through all the things that Emma just mentioned, but I would just like to highlight that actually it was in the 70s that they worked with the government to bring in the student rail card. It was in the 90s that the NUS helped to secure the council tax exemption for students. And it was only in the 2000s that they put together tenancy deposit schemes. But in more recent years, what have they actually been doing? Our students' union has felt little to no repercussions from being separate from the NUS. But of course, we all know that the main reason that people want to join is for the NUS extra card, or for Totem, as it's now called. When these cards were first introduced, they were a great idea for students, only costing £12 for access to loads of brilliant deals. But we've got Uni Days, Student Beans, there are loads of these websites that you can go onto and get these same deals, essentially. And our student union now organises their own discounts for local brands and companies. We want to be part of an institution that's promoting liberation and change for a student body. And currently the NUS is not doing that. £3 million in debt, and this will lead, almost certainly, to a reduction of their liberation officers. Why would we want to join an institution that's in such a state?
Thank you. Jack Green, Welfare and Quality Officer, speaking for the Yes.
As we've mentioned, NUS is a body of over 600 member students' unions that amounts to around 7 million students across the UK, with more and more pressure on students' unions to deliver quality for money and meeting student expectations. How can we make this change on our own? Without the NUS, we would be unable to lobby the UK government and other higher education organisations for real change. If you want to see value for money, you can see the things that have happened across the years, including the massive big wins that have been mentioned already, such as a student rail card, tenancy deposit schemes which were established and made compulsory, protecting student deposits in the private rented sector. NUS back in 1965 founded the Ensley Insurance Company, and because of that insurance company, we are able to provide services to students such as putting students on minibuses. Without this, it would be unlikely that we'd be able to offer that due to the additional cost. I agree that the NUS needs reform, and the NUS isn't denying that fact. Instead, they're trying to embrace it. Change of this is currently ongoing, and if we are part of NUS, then we cannot be a voice in those reforms. It's our unions, and it's all about giving the students of Newcastle their national voice back.
Johnny Hall, the Education Officer, speaking for the No campaign.
This referendum has been triggered by a council motion passed that say we had to have this referendum every 3 academic years. That doesn't mean we can only have the referendum every 3 academic years. This can be triggered by a referendum by the Student Union Trustee Board, for example, or by a signature by 300 students. At this point in time, the NUS is facing a financial deficit of £3 million. Their democratic services are not performing well. Like Scarlett said, we'll likely see a reduction in liberation, which is something that the NUS achieves very well. I do not believe that it's in the best interest of the Students' Union to go back in the NUS at this point. As I say, a referendum could be held in the future when the NUS is in a better state. We will not actually have a voice in those democratic reforms, as this will have to take place before the 2019 conference, as they have said that they're in a crisis. We will not go back in the NUS until September 2019. That means the NUS that we know today will not be the NUS we know when we go back in, and for that reason, I would advocate a no vote at this point.
Okay, thank you to you all. We'll dissect some of the stuff you said in those opening statements in a minute, but let's begin. Scarlett, do you think that NUSU, our students' union, fairly represents students at the moment?
Yes.
You think it's representative and it represents students, it shows a diversity within the body itself?
I think it does.
And you think it's a set of roles that are given out to students, and that, for example, you'll go to Student Union Council and that represents the student body?
So I think the officers that are in place at the moment are very representative. I think they're actually more representative than the NUS's liberation officers.
Okay.
For example, we have a racial equality officer, Chris, who's in the room, and from his job title it's very clear that he is not just there for the liberation of one specific racial minority, whereas the NUS's current equivalent is just called the Black Students Representative. And I think no matter whether in his job description it says that he does, well, except him at the moment, whether he does look after these different racial minorities,
Sure.
that isn't actually open, and it isn't
They introduced a
clear.
trans rep before pretty much any other organisation of that type.
Well, that's brilliant, but they have 3 LGBT officers. I think that's fine, but I don't necessarily think you need 3. Like, an LGBT officer should be able to deal with the different sections.
Okay, I mean, it's a good point. There's so many roles in the NUS, Emma. When you're looking at it, there were 6 sabbatical officers. How many of them can you name
We've got
in the NUS?
the names of the people or the actual jobs.
Let's go with the jobs.
We've got president, we've got
Yeah.
vice president,
Yeah.
we've got women,
Mm-hmm.
we've got a postgraduate one I believe they have now, which they didn't have before.
Right.
They should have they have an LGBT officer.
Is that a full-time role? There's
It's
6
amazing.
there's 6 SAB officers and then 23 part-time
Welfare
officers.
and citizenship or citizenship.
Right. Okay. The fact is you're leading the campaign to rejoin this organisation, and you're not able to name them all. Where's the accountability? The student body are unable to keep on top of union politics just here. How on earth are they going to make sure that the NUS is in check as well?
Well, one of the things I think that's massively overlooked is it actually has an accountability process that people don't talk about. And that allows people to ask the president, to ask the vice presidents, to ask their elected officers questions about what they've been doing, the motions, the delegates, and it's the engagement with that. And if you go on their website, you can see all of the offices, everything they've been working on, all of their research, all of the information on conferences. I think we need to really start talking about the work that they've been doing and actually sort of saying, you know, if you want to know more about the officers you've elected for the NUS, you want to know more about your delegates, then let's go and hold them accountable, because as we've said, it's not perfect. Let's hold them and kind of engage with them as a union that has had sort of uncertainty before, and let's be more active in kind of engaging with them than not at all.
Okay, in your opening statement you talked about the fact that the NUS has achieved many things over long periods of time. What is a tangible benefit for the union to be a member? I'm not talking about what they've done in the past. What is a benefit on a day-to-day basis of being a member of the NUS?
So one of the things that you have if you're in the NUS is you can send delegates. We can send up to 7 officials, which is what the fact on the union have said, that we can send a delegate, but we can send up to 7. So when we're out of the union, we can't go to their conferences. And any student, a delegate can bring a motion. And these have been massive motions to lobby the government for issues that we might just think affect us all, but affect everyone. So
And we're not able to do that on our own at the moment. The president of the SU, the education officer, the welfare and equality officer, they're not able to go and lobby in that way.
we can lobby, but we can't lobby things like the government in terms of costs referendum thing I mentioned, the postgraduate costs. We can't do that on our own because we've only got like a 25,000 membership. But if we've got a delegate who can present a motion to a conference where most people often do agree on these issues, we're part of 7 million people, and we know that they've worked as a lobbying group for the government before. The student union on its own, it's going to look like it's an isolated issue when it's not.
It's a good point. 600 institutions is far more powerful than one. Why not just have a seat around the table?
Well, I'm not arguing against having a seat around the table in the future. I'm just saying. At this
You are.
point,
You're right now. You're saying no. We're not going to join the NUS.
No.
So you're saying for another year at least,
Yes.
really realistically another
Yeah.
3, the students don't deserve a seat around that table. Newcastle students aren't deserving of a seat, unlike the other 599 institutions
Not
that
when
do deserve a
Not
seat.
when we don't know what that will look like. We don't know what the democratic reforms are going to, what will happen with these reforms, because that's action that the executive, obviously the officers are having to take
Sure.
alongside conference. We don't know what that's going to look like in the future.
Okay. What do you say to Scarlett's criticism that those things, you listed them as well, Jack, that all of these achievements they happened a long time ago. The NUS now isn't fit for purpose. It's not achieving all of those things that it was achieving before.
Yeah, I mean, if you actually, so those are just 4 that, well, I've got 4 down here,
Yeah.
that I named as sort of the biggest accomplishments of NUS, but that's not to say there's not other big wins as
Some
well.
of them happened before
But-
our parents were born.
Yeah, but what has that effect been over time? It's
Sure,
not,
yeah. No, but that's great. But you can go and join a club because it was great in the 50s. But the chances are now you don't need to be a member of that club because that club's already done all those good things, and we still reap the benefits of that, and we paid in back then. But what's the benefit of paying now? What are they achieving at the moment?
So there's massive reforms going on at the moment, as we've mentioned. So it's uncertain sort of what will actually be going on.
So the
But
achievements are reforms within the institution. They're achieving being a better institution.
It's-
What are their accomplishments at the moment? What have they done in the last 2 years? I went on the NUS website. There's not a single accomplishment listed for universities since 2016.
that's as a big win. They've accomplished a lot over the years, and it's about uniting students and having that bigger voice. They do a lot of campaigns. So, for example, they're currently doing a campaign called Email Your MP. So it's about 40% of families leave university with highest debt at £57,000. So they're asking every member of their organisation, they're trying to get every student to email their local MP so that they can take it to the UK government and say this is unacceptable. Instead of burdening students with huge debts, we should invest in education that is a public good that benefits the whole society. So they're still doing stuff. It's just overlooked a lot of the time. And I think it's about I think it's been said that even if we're not a member, what effects are our students going to see on a day-to-day basis? And I mean, if we do rejoin, it's unlikely that the individual students will necessarily see a huge impact from NUS from their perspective, but it's what goes on behind the scenes and things like that, especially work for, there's work going on around poverty. The North East is one of the areas with the highest levels of poverty. Why aren't we being a part of this and addressing that from our own point of view? There's work going on into the BME attainment gap, work like that. We need our voice in it, and we need our voice in these reforms.
Scarlett, why not just join? Because you list all of those things. You see the fact that there's so many unions that benefit from being, we see referendums happen all the time. The vast majority of referendums that happen end up in unions saying, actually, we're probably better off in. The uni turns over hundreds of millions of pounds, sees hundreds of millions of pounds come in every year. It's pennies to be a member of the NUS.
At the moment, for our students' union, it's not our union. If we're also having to pay £50,000 plus, we don't know exactly how much that figure is going to be because it depends on how many students are part of the union.
Right.
This is a massive amount of money that we're going to have to pledge, basically taking a massive gamble about whether actually after these reforms, which as Johnny said, we're not going to have any say in, just wondering what's going to happen afterwards. Like, fingers crossed, yeah, we pledge all this money, is it going to be okay? The money that, sorry.
And could I just add to that? I checked today after Emma sent an email into Lindsay Lockie, seen the response, and basically says that when we go to the university for our money each year, we can request up to a 2% increase, but that has to cover things like incremental pay for staff, and we've got to consider as well, we're looking at a motion was passed at Student Council last year for us to pay the living wage.
Okay,
We're
yeah.
going to pay that.
Where did the money saved go 3 years ago?
distributed across budgets across the union, which means we can invest more in services for students. Things like our campaigns, things like our student advice centre, our volunteering projects, the money just gets distributed. There's also refurbishments that go in the union quite often. Things like, you know, when we're reading men's bar loofahs, the money is always of high value to the union, which can be better spent supporting our students right here.
And these, yeah, exactly. These are things that affect our students, that we can see. These are tangible things. Whereas, like, if this money goes off, we don't really know what's going to happen.
Well, it gives you a seat round a table where you're able to lobby in a considerably more powerful way. Forgive me for making it sound like an argument that happens elsewhere in the political world, but surely you're better off negotiating as 600 organisations together than sending some sab, no disrespect, that's only just been elected to go and do that. Surely you're better off handing over some of that power, but in return you then get a far stronger negotiating position and a far bigger voice.
But it depends what you're after. If you're after national reform, then yes, that's absolutely true, and that's why my argument is that we don't know what it'll look like at that point. But if you want to implement change in the Newcastle campus, things like affordability, like the gym, wanting to get money.
Why can't you want both?
Well, because that would limit our ability to spend money on our campaigns and our student advice centre, things that affect students right here.
Is the budget genuinely so tight that we're talking about 50 grand being the difference between either we invest in students at NUSU or we don't? Is it genuinely that tight?
That's a lot of money to be taken out of all our budgets. That is a great amount, and like I say, when we go to the university and ask for more money next year.
What wouldn't you be able to do that you've done this year if some of that money had gone? What are you saying will be taken away? Where would you have to cut your budget?
It is things. It's like our campaigns. It's the amount of them that we can put on for the funds. It's things like training up. We've got our course reps. Like I'm running a campaign next week. Shout out. It's all about raising awareness of the course reps.
Right.
I would have less money available for that, for things for promotion, things like materials, to make that known to students. That's just as an example.
I mean, the finance side is a pretty good argument. I mean, the NUS is hardly, we'll talk about it in a bit, but the NUS is hardly financially responsible by the looks of things. We either can spend the money and see direct repercussions from the money that we spend, or we send it off to somewhere, a new HQ somewhere else in the country, because they're having to move. Well, why not just keep the money for ourselves?
I think that argument, has been used before, that, if we weren't in the NUS, that affiliation cost would go to us. Just to respond to the £50,000, in the last, since about 2011, when we can look at the accounts, we've never paid £50,000, the most we've paid is 40, but we've also paid 30, and we've managed to make 20,000 off the NUS cards alone.
But that's not making money. That's reducing the amount we're
reducing
having to pay. That's not making money. That doesn't make positive numbers. That's just a less negative number.
But it's this idea that when you sell the cards, NUS isn't making a profit, they're giving it into the students.
But why would anybody buy a card anymore? This is a genuine question. What would either of you buy a card?
Yeah, I would, but I would never go to uni days, and I was on it.
Why not?
Because it doesn't work.
I used uni days today in Yo Sushi and got 25% off. Brilliant discount.
There's many stuff on Turton that isn't on uni days. For example, 40% off Pizza Express, 10% off at Co-op. Just to name two.
There is a kind of thing, if you look in the terms and conditions of some, they'll only
Email to sign up for uni days. That's it.
and that doesn't.
If international students.
They've been given a professional score by Trustpilot, 1.6 out of 10.
We have other providers as well, such as Student Beans. Then we've got NUSU, who's been working on bringing our own student perk scheme in, which gets discounts around the city.
And these are all free.
But that's only in the city though, we do travel as students.
But that's as an alternative. That means we've got these national providers like Uni Days and Student Beans, and then we can negotiate our own in the city, and that's when it began this year.
But the Turton card is only one part of it. So as Emma mentioned before, we used to get products for the bar and hospitality through NUS, which they'd driven down prices to ensure that we could get good value for our students' union. Now, since leaving, admittedly, that hasn't really changed, but it's due to the work that the NUS has done that has meant that prices have been driven down, because we're acting as a larger body of students and managing to drive down.
That's not been a benefit to us. Like we say, it hasn't affected our costs when we left.
There has been no
That's
damage
great.
to our students.
That's great for the other student unions, but that's of no benefit to us.
There's so much, and I think if you actually look at...
Like what?
But what?
Well, if you look at... So we're here looking at the commercial entity of NUS, which
Sure.
if you look at that...
Just as a point of information, if you will, you talk to people about the NUS, the majority of them think it's some kind of loyalty card. It's genuinely true. You talk to people, people either know nothing about it, know about some news stories that are pretty damaging towards the NUS around the time that we left, or they know about the NUS card. They don't know about all of the other stuff that goes on. So, surely if that is the most tangible benefit for students, what's the point when you've got other options that you've heard about?
So I think you've got to look at impact. So the work they're doing around the BMA attainment gap, you know, are you saying that that's not important work that needs to be addressed, and is that not worth 40 grand, 50 grand, even 100 grand? Is that not important work? The NUS are currently addressing issues that matter to students and have a massive impact on students' lives. Is that not worth that amount of money?
So like what is a current thing that they're talking about? Because I've watched clips from their conference, and a lot of it was about reforming their own institution. Why not wait until it's fixed, then have this conversation again in 3 years' time?
Because unless we are willing to join the NUS, we cannot have a voice in those reforms. And I do think that even though we're not joining until September, we would be able to give our opinion and voice on how we want NUS to look. And even in September, once the reforms are meant to, the big plans are in place, things like that, there's still a chance to actually shape NUS.
So you say you want NUS to look different. What's wrong with it now?
Well, I'm sure you're getting onto the financials in a little bit, so it's not at the end of the financial year, I believe.
No.
And yes, but you know, they're working to reform that. They're looking at value for money now, and I think the problem has been that the structure and governance has been set for a certain way, and it's been very difficult to change that through conference and things like that, where a lot of the controversies come from. But luckily, we're in a place now where everybody, I think, has come to the conclusion that there needs to be a tangible change, and I think we need to be part of that conversation.
If I can respond to what I believe needs to change, the main thing for me would be one member, one vote. I think the whole conference is actually quite outdated.
Okay, so you want to change it? Join. You can't change it. You're going to say, "I'll vote again in 3 years' time. We'll have another vote, and then it will be good enough." But unless you're there making that argument, who's making that argument if you're not willing to sit around the table?
But if we go back in now, we won't be going back in with a voting position. We'll be saying, whatever you do, we're happy with going back in. If we stay out now, if we put across a message that that's something that we want, then that's something to incentivise.
I mean, no disrespect, 601 and 600 institutions. I don't think they're going to listen to us that much.
That's a fair point. But I think it says something when a large student union such as Newcastle wants something and they're not willing to go back in until then.
So since 2000, you're saying that because we'll vote no, if we vote no, we'll then not be able to. They'll then listen to what our problems were, the problems raised.
I believe they're more likely.
Yeah, exactly. So what's changed since 2016? We voted no. Is it a much better organisation now than it was then?
No.
So they didn't listen.
No, they didn't.
So surely you're better off jumping in. And actually saying
the reason they're more likely to now is because of the position they're in. Their democratic services making such a huge loss. They've got no choice but to listen. In fact, in the email from the chief exec,
they were in a pretty dire state 3 years ago.
But not as well. They haven't sent an email to all president and chief execs like they did a few last month.
Yeah, they probably would have hidden it then.
Yeah.
Is the argument.
Maybe, but I mean, they knew there had the risk of that leaking to the press, which it did.
Okay. I mean, it's difficult to justify, isn't it, when you're looking at an organisation that appears, on the face of it, to be quite financially irresponsible. When you look at running a 3 million loss, a business runs a 3 million loss, in big trouble. So I'm trying to think, you know, shareholders go in revolt. I don't.
I mean, NUSU was in debt about 10 years ago or so.
I think some people would have voted to abolish that as well. I don't, you know.
But did everybody leave our students' union? Well, we worked together to make it a lot better.
That's not the same thing. Students at Newcastle are part of the Newcastle Students' Union. It's not like it's not the same as the NUS, and it was more like 15 years ago.
Financial difficulties can hit anyone, and it depends on changing.
Well, it can hit anyone when you run a business a business irresponsibly. If you run a business responsibly or a union responsibly,
I don't think that's true. You know, it's a tough climate at the moment in the UK for business and things like that, and it's difficult being in a democratic institution where it's slower and more difficult to make governance changes and things like that.
Okay. I mean, they've got 6 full-time sabbatical officers that they all needed. You got 23, so got huge conferences with lovely podiums. I've been watching the videos that are very well produced. None of that comes cheap. None of that's free. So they've evidently spending a lot of money. It's just, I feel like people are going to look at an organisation making. I mean, you couldn't have timed these stories, worse. Just at the beginning of the month, we're hearing the fact that we've got a loss-making union, and at the end of the month, Newcastle University votes to rejoin that union. I mean, surely that looks like a bit of odd press, if nothing else.
I wouldn't really say that. I think what's more odd is we're in a 5% that aren't in. Why is it that Cambridge and York and Essex and Durham think it's okay, but we don't? Why are we in this 5%? We say, no, we're too, it's not necessarily we're too good for the NUS, but we've seen things that these other unions maybe haven't seen, and we're in this minority. I think going in at this time, they have had financial difficulties, and what happened is they came up one of their strongest periods in 2006, where they had the most engagement. So it's not as if they've not been in it before, and that was because they were a victim of the massive worldwide economic crash that a lot of people were.
Sure. You've been around campus a bit, I imagine, probably talking to people about the NUS. Honestly, how many people are enthused by this referendum?
So I think we need to be honest. We've seen the turnout here. We can't lie that it's massive, but it never.
No, that is true.
And I think that is a thing that we see with our own students' union when we talk about everything. It's this lack of engagement. But for the students who do care, I've noticed that they're always what would seem as the liberation groups or the marginalised students. It's the disabled students, the ones with mental health problems or LGBT students, that feel really betrayed because they've been here when they were in the NUS and they're still here now that we're out.
I spoke to two people before I came here. One of them said, I just briefly asked, what do you think of the NUS? One of them says, does it actually make a difference how we vote in this referendum? The other one asked, what's that? So, if people aren't that bothered by it, what's the point in chucking 50 grand or 30 grand or a penny, whatever, at an institution that people don't actually care about?
So, I spoke to a postgrad student who's been here for 7 years who said they couldn't even understand why it had to go to a referendum. They just thought that we should be part of the NUS by just by the ethics of it and things like that. So, is it that since we've left the NUS, people have lost their drive for student politics because we're not part of a bigger change-making organisation?
Sorry, it went to a referendum because students signed a
No,
petition for a referendum.
But their point was they saw it as a thing that was really good. But obviously they experienced 4 years of being in it. They thought it was astonishing that we even had to have a referendum to be part of it. To them, they just thought, we've lost our national voice, it feels very isolated now.
Johnny, in your opening statement, you said that you said that democratic services aren't performing well. I mean, is that a reason not to rejoin a union? Let's be honest. 13% turnout in the sabbatical officers elections that got you your job. That's a democratic service perhaps not performing very well. Is that a reason not to jump in to?
I'm obviously talking financially quite well. The conference is very expensive to run. One thing that happens is further education colleges have to pay to affiliate, but they pay a smaller fee than higher education providers. But then the cost of getting them delegates to conference is a lot more, and that's why I advocate going to more of a one member, one vote system. Maybe we don't need such a huge national conference where we elect delegates. Let all students have a say in it. That's what I mean by the democratic difficulties.
You've got a series of suggestions for reform, and yet you don't want to have a voice about it. I think that's the thing that it's.
Because we wouldn't have a voting place in those reforms. We joined in September 2019 after their annual conference where all the reforms are spoken about, and that's where it will get.
And that'll be the end of it. There's no chance of reform in the future.
No.
You're saying that's it. This is it. This is they.
No, sorry. I mean, no, sorry. There is. Sorry, I meant there is chance of reform in the future.
Sure.
It's
not while we're not a member.
The way it'll look in September will be completely different than now. They're not going to have another major radical reform. But if we're happy with the position that they've made by September, or in 2 years' time, or 3 years' time when it's triggered again, then we go back in, and then we push for any further reform we want. We've actually heard that potentially one member, one vote is on the agenda. But if we go back in and we don't have a say, and they decide to cut that off, then we'll have no say about that. By saying this is the stance that we want to take, let's stay outside, wait and see. Then if they don't deliver on that, then we stay out. If they do, then we're in a much more stronger position to go back in.
The fact is that the acting chief executive is doing weekly Skype meetings with any union who would like to speak to them. We've got a chance to make change, but if we say, we want you to change, but we're not going to be part of you, and we're not going to help you with that, but we expect you to change before we rejoin, don't think that's wrong, and we're definitely not going to have our voice
We can
heard.
suggest anything we want, but ultimately there's 600 other unions who have a voting position right now who can decide that.
Yeah. It takes 8 trustees to decide to have another referendum here. That's 6 Sabbatical officers who decide yes, yeah. 6 Sabbatical officers who think, actually, I think that there has been an issue in the last couple of years, maybe we should rethink this, and 2 other people on that board. There's no reason why this couldn't happen next year after these reforms have happened.
But referendum, we're talking about finance a lot here, and these referendums that we are currently running cost NUSU money. They cost money to promote, put on events, things like that. It's costing
Money
NUSU
which you want to chuck to the NUS.
Yeah, because I believe that it's a better use of money than, rerunning this referendum in a year's time.
The amount of money we're talking about is quite small. We said there could be 3 candidates on each side, £50 per candidate. That's £300 in campaign. We've only got 2 candidates. That's only £100 right there.
But as well as the sponsored Facebook posts, things like that, it all
That comes
costs.
that's part of that. That's part of our campaign.
I think you're referring to the sponsored Facebook post in terms of nusu.com/vote. Those sorts of sponsored stuff. So campaigns do cost money.
Yes. But isn't
We're-
that incredibly important to engage the student body, and wouldn't you think that was a good
Yeah.
idea?
I don't think that question was rhetorical.
It wasn't.
Yeah, I do, but I think it's just something to consider. If you are going to talk about money and things like that, if we're wanting to make change and things like that, we have to be part of it.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about politics. There's a sentence I loathe saying. So, when you join the NUS takes a series of positions, of political positions. I looked around their website, and actually there's a huge amount of information about sort of the policies that they back and the sorts of politics that they endorse. Is that not a bit weird for a large organisation that is meant to be representing a diversity of opinions to take some pretty hard, pretty radical policy choices? They're not just championing campaigns; they're making political stances.
I would say that no, not at all, because we have this discussion a lot about are student unions truly non-political, and often people say, well, no, nobody can be truly unaffiliated to political ideas. And you look at the politics of the NUS, they're often led by supporting students. So one of the things they did was support the rent strike, for example, which is universities in the south of England where they're expected to pay several £100s a week to live in accommodation that isn't as substandard. So they supported that because they're supporting students. And that is a political position because they're supporting a strike, and that is, of course, a political ideal, and obviously...
So when we had 2 votes at council last year at NUSU as to whether to support the strike or to oppose the strike, and council made the decision, neither. We're going to stay neutral. Students at Newcastle University, therefore, they're content with being neutral. They're content with stepping back and actually looking at policy and negotiating a way out of it. Whereas you're then having to sign up to all of the policies that the NUS takes, all of the politics and internal things there by joining. That's going to upset students. That's going to make certain students feel like they don't belong in part of that institution.
I mean, arguably, I think the thing with the strikes is that we both failed, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're neutral because we didn't have a stance.
So was NUSU for or against the strikes?
Well, it didn't agree it was neutral either. It just said that it's kind of not.
But it voted down. I think
students.
We were neutral by default.
By
I think
default,
that's
we're
the
not
best
in
way
a
to put it.
position that they assured, because we're very
Right.
reluctant to have any position at all. In the end, we're
Yeah,
really like
okay.
having a
But in
position
terms
at
of the
all.
NUS, we're signing up to policies like I say, which 600 institutions get to have a say on. That's quite a small say, and potentially taking those sorts of political stances. You don't think that's
I think the political stances that I've observed have always been in the best interest of students.
right?
So it supports things like kind of the poverty, looking at the poverty, it's supporting the rent strikes because of students. It's not being scared and saying, well, we can't step in on political issues because we've got to be honest. We can't be political because we'll upset people. We're going to stand with students and the fact that politics affects students. We're not avoiding politics because it's too contentious. We're not avoiding them because it's too controversial. Because politics affects the students. We don't have to agree with every single thing that they say.
Students like politics. Surely giving them another outlet, another forum to go and talk political. Surely that's something that would actually engage more students. That could potentially increase students. I mean, there is a correlation between the fact that turnout was higher a couple of years ago than it is now, and we're not in the NUS anymore. Surely it's kind of we've gone so small scale that people aren't interested anymore. The excitement of a national union.
I think the problem with the NUS, as left-leaning as I am and as left-leaning as it is, it does not represent students who aren't left-leaning. Like, there are lots of students who affiliate themselves with different political parties, and this has been highlighted by presidential campaigns for the NUS, and those people didn't win. But I think that's a big issue of, like, I might be I am left-leaning, but I do think that there are other students who are kind of, they feel very separate from the NUS because they're conservative or because they believe in other things, and they don't feel represented by a massive body which is so Labour, so left-leaning.
Opportunity to respond.
So I would respond to that there is always this argument that there's a big Labour presence in the NUS, that it is very left-wing. As the NUS stands for students who have had Tory governments for quite some time, it makes sense that it can't necessarily present a more conservative or kind of, we'll say centre-right, because I think saying right would maybe be unfair, but that they can't really present, perhaps, you know, we're here for conservatives, but then we're lobbying their policies and saying that we don't agree with them. I think conservative students would kind of maybe not, it would create this kind of thing where, of course, they're going to maybe be more on the left and with Labour because it's the Tories' policies that are against.
I think it boils down to the fact that a student's a student no matter what political party they align themselves with, and they should really be focusing on the students themselves, not particularly affiliating themselves with a certain political belief, because...
Go on, Chris.
Well, you say that, but for example, the NUS campaigned, for example, with the freedom of Nelson Mandela in the 1980s, and that was an expressly political viewpoint that they had. And whereas some people would say that the opinions they've taken on certain stances are political, some others would just say they're simply moral.
Yeah.
And you say that maybe it should be more representative of students from the wider political spectrum, but then it is the case that some students who were on the centre-right and the right during that time were against Nelson Mandela being released in the 1980s.
But I think you said it yourself that that was a moral thing, rather than necessarily being political.
But I mean...
Not everything's political, though.
Yeah.
Wise person told me that.
Well, I'd really just like to respond to that and just say, you know, that's a really thing that NUS should be proud of, that they campaigned for that. I think to be totally representative of students, and this is why I keep coming back to the way conferences run, or like one member, one vote. You need it. For instance, with the sabbatical officer elections, whilst the turnout isn't high, every student has the opportunity to vote. But with the National Union of Students, not every student has the opportunity to vote. It's the delegates and the officers who vote. So I think that's when you can become more representative of students, and through that, and then you get a wider consensus. If there's a particular motion coming up, then every student across the country, through an app, through Totem, whatever, has that opportunity.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
So just to say with delegates, obviously they're voted in kind of like the way you would vote in an officer during the election, so when we had the delegates with COM. I think it's interesting if you look into this argument of one member, one vote. The NUS have never been against it, they're having conversations about it now. Some delegates aren't a fan of it because there's this idea, how truly democratic is it? Why is it we aren't so keen to let the delegates vote, but we're quite keen for them to be writing the motions and taking them, and we haven't talked to them about that. But we need to remember our own Students' Council, that we only about 80 at full actually vote on motions that affect the whole union. They're not online, and as we said in the last one, some people can't come to council, some people can't get access to casual places. We're putting forward motions that affect the entire student population, and we've got not even 80 people voting on it. Is that also maybe that's not democratic, but we're criticising the NUS for the same thing?
Yeah, I think a lot of the people that would criticise the NUS would also criticise the way that our student
On the
council
website, there
runs.
is actually an ability for students to go on there and say whether they agree or not with motions, and people who have casual voting places are recommended to go look at those. Whether students use them or not, they are there, and you are recommended to look and see whether students have engaged with this and see what the student body think.
I think the problem is opportunity. So I understand what you mean about student council. Compare the 26,000 students, we have 60 students at student council.
Yeah.
That I can understand what you mean there. But it's the opportunity that every student has the opportunity to vote at council, but not every student has the opportunity to vote in national policies that NUS might propose.
So, I mean, this comes back to it, doesn't it? It's about the accountability of the NUS. I mean, you weren't able to name the the fact that there's an NUS president and then several vice presidents, and each one of those vice presidents has an independent role. Those talks about the complexity of that. How do you hold the NUS to account?
Well, if we think literally within the NUS itself, they have accountability structures. So you have the right to ask the president or the vice or any of the staff's questions during the conferences. Anybody can send a question.
Yeah.
You can ask your delegate to ask them a question. And you can also sort of hold them to account as you would anybody. You can comment. A lot of delegates will talk about their experiences on social media through their own pages, through their own students' union.
Sure.
And you're allowed to contact the NUS and ask them. And I think we need to be kind of engaging more with them and not just thinking that we're sending our delegates to a conference. Talk to the delegates and ask them to sort of pass their concerns on, because any delegate can bring a motion. And if we have an issue, then bring a motion to the conference.
Easy peasy. Why not? Jump in.
Well, ultimately, I think it's the fact that for these national, the people who might run for delegate are really engaged in student politics, and the average student isn't. That's not to say that the average student shouldn't still have a say. I really just highly doubt that there'll be a lot of students who are even aware. We know most students aren't aware of the NUS and the delegate system. So I think that's it's good in theory, but practically I don't think that'll be how it can work.
But isn't that our fault, not the NUS's fault? That it's if we don't know about the delegates, because it's engaged students only are running. It's the engaged students who are running for all the positions, the officer positions, and surely it's our fault for not sort of shouting about the fact that you have an NUS delegate. This is who they are. Talk to them.
That is a problem, but that's a problem, and we're not perfect. I completely admit that. But we do, we do put messages out there. We send emails to all students about NUS referendums, and we do the same if it was delegates. We're trying. Harry and Chris have done a fantastic job organising this. We facilitated the campaigners on each side, given allocated funds for that. We've gone out and talked to students, done like a video just to see what students are aware. There's a lot of work that does go into promoting it, and I will say we do not get that perfect. But with so many projects the student union runs, it can be difficult to perfectly achieve everything, such as making people aware of the delegate system.
And I think actually the fact that this debate itself was organised by students rather than the union itself kind of is testament to the fact that there are actually still students interested in politics.
Okay, so I think we just moving on to sort of actually the final part of what is the future of the NUS. We've talked a little bit about it, the future of our relationship with them. What do you, kind of to all of you, what do you think? Well, actually, to those of you who say that we shouldn't rejoin, what have we achieved since leaving? What have we done since leaving that we couldn't have done if we were a member? Is the NUS stopping us from doing anything by being a member of it?
No. We had a really successful year last year in terms of wins. Like the sabbatical team last year were very effective. We had things like.
But could you have done all those things even while being a member of the NUS?
Yes.
But with less funds behind those campaigns, the pots of money available for PTOs would certainly be at least slightly reduced. Think about it, like, as we said earlier, all that money that we save by not paying into the NUS over the last couple of years is spread into loads of different budgets to help.
We've read about the ways you get that money back, though. I mean, the finances aside, there doesn't seem to be, that seems to be the crux of, it seems to be really the only sticking point of the argument is that it's a small amount of money that we'll have to put in. Other than that,
I would disagree that it's a small amount of money. Especially like Scarlett said, when we're requesting things like Raf, who's working on getting tampons spread all across campus available for free for students. We're introducing a postgrad sabbatical officer. We still have condoms. We give out free condoms, and then we're asking for £50,000 for NUS membership on top of that. That's going to be a difficult sell, as well as supporting the living wage and paying the increase in staff costs.
I think separate from the finances, though, in the email that was sent out to all of the current members, they said that because of the debt that they're currently in, they're borrowing against the building they own, which is money, making cuts to staff, but they're turning off some of the activities that they deliver. In the future, if we were part of this organisation, they're saying that they're going to turn off, in their own words, some of their own activities, which would be things like the conferences that we would want to be part of, which they're just not going to be doing as much of. It would be things like the liberation activities. These campaigns that you talk about being like really important, like the BAME representative like attainment gap, these are things that they wouldn't be able to put their money towards, that we as a union have actually been like, we're doing a good job. Like there was a good Black History Month Trans Awareness Week, all of these things are things that we do as a student union very well.
I mean, it's a good point, isn't it? Is that if we're joining an institution while they're about to start weighing back the spending, it's hardly an enticing offer.
I mean, in my opinion, I'm for them reining back their spending on certain aspects and certain things that we are fortunate. We're quite a big students' union. We provide things that smaller students' unions can't do. So, in my opinion, I think NUS will stop providing things that we've already got and hopefully rein it in there. I think the heart of NUS is all to do with sort of liberation, education issues, things like that, and I don't think those issues will be stopped with this reduction in funding. I think that'll always be at the heart of it, and I think we're at a position where, I mean, you can look at it in very black and white, the finance and things like that, but, you know, they produce reports and things like that that could be vital to us and save, like, staff members' time and things like that, so you can look at it a more creative way and actually think, oh, we're getting our value for money and this, that and the other. If students really care that passionately about it, I'm pretty sure we could go to the university and say, we want to be part of this, we are demanding this.
The students don't care that passionately about it because I decide for this campaign. So surely people, you say if students are that, what's the point of going to all that effort when students don't really seem to care?
I think the tangible change that each individual student can see is minimal, but you know, it's the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, and it's about us making students aware of things like that. And you know, finance and not knowing the future, they're kind of the two main arguments of not going back in. But you know, take away finance, and the only thing you're left with is, well, we don't know what it's going to look like. And you know, if we're not part of that conversation, we're never going to know what it looks like, and we're not going to have our say in that.
If there's anybody in our audience today that would like to ask something, then please feel free, Chris.
First, I'd just like to say thank you all for coming so much. Despite the very small turnout, I think it is very good to go along and see the product of such a rewarding and important conversation. The thing is that, as we've touched upon, a lot of students don't find this an important conversation. And we have touched upon the fact that a lot of students are will not engage with this conversation. And it leads to a very practical question. Do either side of you think that we will reach the 5% necessary turnout for a constitutional change to happen in Newcastle Students' Union?
I think it's difficult to say at the moment because we haven't actually started running our campaigns. This debate actually starts before any promotional material for the debate from either side of us has actually come out.
It's still very close though, it's only 3rd of December that it happens. Do you think you'll be able to reach the 5% turnout necessary in that time period?
People are aware of sabbatical elections long before the sabbatical election period begins. People are talking about it and are aware of them. It doesn't seem to be that on campus.
I would say the reason for that though is because you've got, you know, students running that. A lot of students, over, you know, at least over 30 most of the time. How many students have we got campaigning in this referendum? 2.
Yeah. And our deadline for sending in posters is Monday. They're not going to be printed before then. That's just when it all has to be sent in. I think that our university has been dealing with a lot of very difficult things very recently, and it has pushed back talks about this. So I think you'll see, when you see the promotional material out on campus, the people will start to get a bit more engaged.
We're going to hit 5%, Joe?
I don't think we will, and I think that'll be a real shame. And I think, you know, the difference is you walk into the Students' Union, you can't get away from seeing my face everywhere. We don't have things like that for NUS, and
yes, you do.
really, how much do we do to educate students on NUS and things like that?
There are signs all over the Students' Union at the moment.
But as Johnny said when we did a video about it earlier, we went round the campus and said, what does the NUS stand for? I have no idea. Oh, that's National Student. People who did know what it stood for, what do they do? We have no idea.
That's not the NUS as it is right now.
But is that not also our feelings as a Students' Union?
So whether people vote for or against...
Emma, you said yes, it was their feelings.
I think it's quite hard to expect the NUS to sort of be responsible for its marketing within unions and sort of saying
why not? Well, I don't understand why we haven't seen an NUS delegate. I don't get why an NUS delegate hasn't contacted us asking to take part in a debate. I'm completely perplexed by the fact they don't seem to.
They contacted the yes side, so they contacted me.
So they contacted you, but they didn't. So they contacted somebody who supports their argument. They don't need to convince you. Why are they not contacting other students? Why are we not seeing NUS posters around campus? Why is the NUS don't seem that bothered by our referendum?
They're not really allowed to. They would see that as influencing it if the NUS came on.
They literally are selling a product to us.
It's in our constitution that they are not allowed on campus around the referendum.
Right.
We've spoke to the
But we've agreed this isn't campaign period, and yet we haven't been contacted. We contacted people from the NUS. We spoke to NUS delegates that weren't interested in coming. I'm perplexed by their lack of interest in
regardless
this.
of us being in the NUS, the acting chief executive knew that the referendum was coming up, so he came up to speak to the 6 sabbatical officers.
How many students did he speak to?
It was the 6 sabbatical officers. It was
I know he spoke to the 6 sabbatical officers, full-time members of staff whose job is not to be a student. How many students did he speak to?
That's our job. Our job is to speak to students about the NUS. You can't expect an organisation of that size
To speak to students, even though
to
it's a
speak
national
to
union
7
of
million
students.
students.
Well, he could have spoken to a few. They could have come here and spoken to. Is that not the problem, though?
I'm pretty sure Johnny will probably know what they did speak to students. Shakira Martin, when she came up as part of the In Freshers Week, as part of the
Came and spoke to Radio 4.
spoke to students on campus as well. I believe Shakira spoke
She
to.
didn't tell me that.
Spoke to Radio 4, then went and had a meeting with the president before having a picture outside the union, and then went home. Is that fair?
I couldn't comment. I don't know, but I do think there's appetite for NUS for us to be back in, and I think it's difficult for them to do it. And I think it's difficult for the students' union also to promote it. I know I'm criticising the body that I'm representing here. It's difficult. We have a lot of messages that we're trying to get out and things like that, and it's difficult for us to say that. And really, it's about empowering students to get engaged in things like this. And unfortunately, we're just not achieving that.
I think it's really disappointing that no matter whether students are going to vote yes or no, that you don't think that you're going to be able to run a good enough campaign to get 5% of the students to turn out. I think that's really disappointing.
It's not necessarily an implication. I think the turnout, it's sort of when campaigning starts, who's to say we won't get more than 5%?
Jack just did.
Jack just said you won't.
I said I wasn't sure if we would.
I mean, nobody can. We can't
You said you
100%
didn't think we
say.
would.
Okay.
But for both sides. Not
Okay.
No, I
cool.
think we do. I think
Turnout's
we
based
will.
on both votes, not.
Yeah, it
Sure.
doesn't matter whether you vote
Sure.
yes or no. It's all about the people getting involved, whether they vote yes or no.
Do you think NUSU is purposely stalling the conversation to avoid joining the NUS?
No, not in any way. Actually, we're constitutionally obliged to run it every 3 academic years.
Why in December? You said how busy you all are, and I understand that. Why now? Why not wait? Because actually, on the whole, sabbatical officers seem more cynical of the NUS than pro-NUS. So why not? Why not just wait? We had it in I think April last time. Why not just wait a couple more months? Why have it now if it's so busy?
It was looking at the calendar of the year essentially, and just when what fit well.
Right.
When we came at the start of the year, when would be a good time for an election, and this looked like a good time.
And we discussed having it alongside the officers' elections in March, but we thought we didn't really want to distract from
Sure.
that and have.
Oh,
We wanted to ensure people who had voted had done that with knowing the correct information, things like that. So we did it. We chose to do it this time to ensure that we could provide information that wasn't lost in other messages, things like that.
Why did you ask the question? Just out of interest.
Well, how long's when do you start campaigning?
Posters are printed on Monday.
Monday.
It'll be from Monday.
Isn't that like 2 weeks?
So it'd be a week of campaigning and then a week of voting.
Yeah.
That's how it works during the sabbatical officer.
And we've actually allowed for longer time this year for the actual voting period to run than in the previous campaign.
I just asked Chris,
Nice.
I think it's a lot of time and what goes into it. So I think running it over a longer period would, possibly detrimental to student well-being.
Also, as someone who knows literally nothing about this, and that's why I've come here, because I don't know anything, do you not think that, NUSU, we don't, as someone who just passes through uni not really knowing anything, I'm not really, it's not really advertised as much, and it isn't the only reason I know about this whole debate is because I'm friends with Chris. But you don't, nothing seems to be, there's no momentum. There's no momentum for it. There's nothing from from the NUSU
I-
telling us that it's happened?
Just putting that in the frame of the NUS being a positive or negative thing, I think you want to join or not. Is that not, by becoming a member, we're not just adding another distraction onto all of the things that we're already disenfranchised with? We're not adding another distraction.
No, I wouldn't say so. I think if we go into the NUS, like, there isn't necessarily a distraction because there's a lot of correlation of issues anyway. And I think being part of the NUS, I think it's like that empowerment of like a lot of students who feel really disenfranchised. The people that felt so upset when we left, I think would feel quite happy to see us go back in.
Yeah.
Because we're part of the conferences that we can go to, the black students, LGBT women,
Sure.
trans, who might feel that union isn't accessible because if you look at the picture, for example, of some of the governing bodies, their diversity is far stronger than ours is. And I think that's where we kind of, as a union, could do a lot better, where the NUS are actually kind of leading.
So, on Johnny's point there, surely actually, Jimmy's point there. Sorry, Johnny. So, on Jimmy's point there, asking Johnny the question, actually, throw another form of representation in that might enthuse students. Why not? A form of representation for students. Another place for them to express their ideas. The NUS. Why not do that? And you give it a go, because we've said that people feel relatively disenfranchised at the moment, so why not give them another platform? Another place to potentially...
Because that platform won't be there till next academic year, and we don't know what it looks like.
So forgive me. The argument for not joining is we won't join quick enough.
Well, that's just how it works. I mean,
I understand that's how it works, but I just asked you whether or not you should give students another platform to express their ideas, i.e. the NUS, and you said we won't join until September.
Well, it's because the funds that we'd have to put into an organisation we know nothing about how it will appear, that can be better used for the next academic year. Let's wait and see what the NUS will be when it's had its reforms, which we won't have a seat around the table at, and then we reconsider.
Right. It's a kind of a tomorrow never comes argument, though, isn't it? Because you just keep going and going and going, and in 3 years' time, somebody will be sat in your chair and say the exact same thing, and then this is just sort of a perpetual cycle.
It doesn't have to be 3 years.
It doesn't have to be 3 years. There's other ways to trigger a referendum, and this is a very unique situation for the NUS right now. £3 million deficit, so public. This hasn't happened before with a referendum. So I don't think it'll be just the same old when it comes to the next referendum, if it is in 3 years' time or earlier.
Cool. Okay, I think I'll give you each a moment to round up your arguments now, if there isn't anything from our audience there. Go on, Chris.
Just one question. Yeah. My predecessor, Sophia Robinson, when we left the NUS 3 years ago, resigned because she said that, I think she might have been overstating a little bit, but she said that NUSU doesn't care about BME people. I think that might be a bit of an overstatement, but do you not think there's some argument to the fact that the NUS does do a lot for liberation-based groups and for increasing, it might not do practical things, but as a symbolic act, it does represent equality quite well.
But what's the point of having a symbolic act and not doing anything? It's like pop feminism. Like, you're like, oh, I stand for this, but I'm not going to do anything. And what's the point in being a symbol if you're not actually doing anything?
I think I remember exactly what you're talking about with Safi. She said that I don't think this union supports me. She was very upset. She was on the Yes, one of the people who was sort of part of the Yes to NUS campaign last time. We've actually seen quite a lot of sort of people who used to be in our students' union who've graduated, who've actually got onto NUS structures. We've seen Foppe, the ex-president of the BAME networks, actually on their council because they feel that the NUS represents them when perhaps their own student unions don't. They have the Black Conference where they listen to their issues, and I think some of the cynicism that sometimes it was viewed as cynicism, as criticism of our union. They felt that the NUS was a better template than our own, and I think it's not a great message to send to liberation groups when they're the ones that are the most hurt when we come out, because it is the NUS that's putting all this research into the liberation groups and the conferences and has a far better record for diversity in key positions than most students' unions would have.
What liberation officers are campaigning for Yes right now?
In this union or generally?
In this union, we've got only one yourself, the campaigner for the yes vote. There's no liberation officer who's campaigning for
Not
it.
a liberation officer voting for no either. You know,
How many of them are sat with you?
Well, there just doesn't seem to be any interest. That's what I mean. So
Yeah, but
Yeah.
maybe they're sitting it out. Maybe they're actually going.
Yeah.
We'll let the people decide if we're considered elected representatives. It's
liberation is in my job title. It's welfare, liberation, and campaign. For me, I'm sat on this side talking about how
As an
all the
undecided vote.
benefits.
I don't think that's fair to use that.
That's
If I think if I was representational of, I'm in a representational role and I'll be voting on a representational front, and I think the people who I do represent, would want yes, and I'm a voice for marginalised groups of students at Newcastle University, and that's something that I have to bear in mind in my role in this election.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of stuff that NUS does really well and tackles big, issues that students have had. And I mean, we've touched on those big wins, and I don't want that to be lost, because even though they might have happened 10 years apart, they're such big wins that we would have never been able to do on our own, and have had such a big impact on students. If you think about the amount of money that students have saved on council tax each year, rail cards, things like that, and being able to drive down the prices for our students' union bar commercial outlets, I think it's important to bear that in mind. And hopefully, coming up, the work that they're doing on the BME attainment gap, the work, on low-income families, things like that, will have tangible change that students might not recognise has come from the NUS, but will massively benefit students all across the UK.
As a point of clarity, I'm aware, I don't know if they'll forgive me for saying, so I won't mention which Liberation officer it is, but one of the Liberation officers is vehemently, is very, very pro-NUS and was considering speaking to us today. But there we go. So, I'll give you a moment all to summarise your thoughts on this, and before we quickly run down how you actually vote, if you're going to. We'll start with Johnny.
So we've heard a lot about the success of the NUS in the past. They may very well have more achievements. There's not some we've seen in recent years since the postgraduate loans. And I think when there's so much uncertainty about an organisation that's in £3 million of deficit, it just isn't logical to go back in that organisation at this point, when we won't have a seat around the table in deciding its future. We won't go back in until those reforms have happened. Let's stay as we are for the moment. We've had a lot of success the last year, a lot of big academic wins in the previous year, achieved by sabbatical officers and part-time officers through the voice of our students. We can use the funds from that to influence change on our campus, more tangible change for our students than rather than the NUS, which we are not sure what role we'll have in a national voice when it comes to re-entering the NUS.
Jeffrey.
I think it's important to everyone sort of watching and partaking in this debate to actually think about, do you feel represented at a national level? If no, then this is the perfect time to get your voice across. We've spoken about the financial issues, and to me, it's not really a good enough argument on its own. Harry's spoken about, is it a good business? Is it running like a good business? They've got assets that they've invested in over the years, planning for a possible circumstances like this. They're not going to go bankrupt, to the best of my belief, because they've invested in those assets, run it as a good business, and they're now looking at reforming. They've got the appropriate people in. I believe that it's being run as a good business. The commercial part is viable. It's just the democratic part that needs reform, which is happening now. I think it's important for all marginalised groups at Newcastle to have a national voice and to lobby and hold the UK government and other higher education providers to account.
Emma Dawson.
Yeah, I think just summing up the arguments, I think the key thing, as we've said, is to have done great work, not just for your everyday student, also your liberation groups. And I think just sort of talk about the cost is seen to try and put a cost on those experiences of liberation students, which I think is worrying. I think it's important that we do reconsider going back. I think there's a lack of kind of ambition, if you want, that we sort of keep saying, oh, well, we're not going to go back in. We're sitting in a 5% minority of students' unions, and I don't really think that we belong there. I think as a university that has a lot to be proud of, we belong there because we have a lot of similar issues. And I think we need to share the same sorts of things we've discussed to really push for the radical reforms, which they have admitted themselves that they have a real appetite for. And I don't think it's advantageous for us to sort of be on the outside in this isolated minority, talking about all the fantastic things they've done and portraying ourselves as unambitious and unwilling to actually contribute to any sort of wider discussions.
Scarlett.
I know that the idea of this financial situation has been brought up, but it's because in their own words they say that they're going to have to turn off some of their activity that they offer. That means that we would essentially be paying money into an institution that is saying they're actually going to be doing less for liberation when we could be spending that money on increasing the activities that our PTOs, our special officers do to engage our students to actually make tangible change on our own campus, rather than sending this money off and fingers crossed that something's going to happen. Yes, we can still run these campaigns, but they're going to be less well funded on our own campus.
Thank you to all four of you. He's so keen that he has another question.
I do apologise for this. Please do blame me completely if I've disrupted the format of the debate.
Entirely.
So I apologise very much for that. Maybe the reason why I haven't brought this up already is because I thought it would be brought up by the Remain Outside the NUS, is anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
Why has this not been brought up in the debate? Is the problem still there?
So I did look into this anti-Semitism debate. So it wasn't mentioned, but I did look into it. And this president, Malia, who was the last president of the NUS, had two, what you would say, they seemed like scandals around her. This accusation of anti-Semitism, and also the really racist accusation that she was an ISIS sympathiser, which was actually the press.
I think that's a different thing.
But they were at the same time, and this led to this sort of discussion of let's disaffiliate because she was
These weren't simply accusations. These
No.
were conclusions judged by the Home Affairs Select Committee.
And it's still happening now. In 2017, people who were part of the NUS were found to have tweets that were talking about, saying very disparaging things about people who were Jewish. It's not something that's really gone away.
And sorry, I'm interrupting again, so please do shut me up if I speak too much. But I spoke earlier about liberation groups and people being represented. How can we enter into a national organisation where Jewish students still feel afraid to say that they're Jewish?
I think as well, like you had our debate about it, I think it's a wider issue, and I think that we should be talking about it. In terms of the sort of anti-Semitism debate, she was asked for a response on that, and she felt that it wasn't quite. She talked about kind of Zionist activism as well, and she referred to sort of the University of Birmingham, where they had a Friends of Palestine who felt really like they couldn't speak about issues because of the sort of.
But this was years ago. Like, what about what happened last year?
Jewish students still will make statements about the fact that they don't feel like it's a place for them. That the NUS is not a place for them. Just like that's a pretty heavy statement to say, and then to say, go on, have 50 grand.
I think it's very valid, and I think what we can suggest is if Jewish students do feel really underrepresented.
They don't feel underrepresented. They feel like they're not safe there. That's what certain students have said. There's not having representation, and there's not feeling safe in an institution that's meant to protect you.
I think what could definitely happen is that we can, when we're talking about reform, these radical reforms, and these accountability structures before, we can hold them to account with what they've said, and really ask them to respond to that and make Jewish people feel empowered to push motions through, and to kind of ask their delegates, what will you do to represent Jewish students at this university, to make sure that these kind of anti-Semitist accusations aren't going to kind of not be dealt with, because I think it is kind of not, it's kind of holding them to account and engaging with them and kind of asking them respond to it, rather than sort of asking them to sort of speak about it and make them kind of push it to the front and make them respond to it.
Well, there we go. Thanks for your closing statements, and that as well. To our four panelists, thank you very, very much indeed. To our tech team from NUTV, thank you very, very much for making this so widely available to so many students, we hope. To our audience who came today, thank you. A particular thank you to Chris. This was entirely his effort and must have put in. This was not NUSU. NUSU did not organise this. Chris organised this, and he did a great service by doing that. And thank you for, and you gave me an opportunity to pretend I'm important. So cheers. So thank you very much to our panelists. The NUS referendum takes place the week commencing the 3rd of December. Vote in the usual way. NUSU, vote there. Anyway, cheers. Cheers. There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you.